Hey there, folks. Welcome back to another wild tale from the heart of America, where the land tells stories louder than any politician's speech. Today, I'm diving into a story I'm calling The Line in the Dirt. It's about a small-town farmer who finds his quiet life upended by a power-hungry HOA president with a vendetta and a fleet of bulldozers. Armed with nothing but his wits, a few old documents, and a whole lot of grit, he turns the tables in a battle that's as much about truth as it is about territory. Buckle up, because this one's got more twists than a back road at midnight. Let's get to it. The sun was barely creeping over the horizon, painting the alfalfa fields in shades of gold, when I heard the rumble. It wasn't the usual hum of my neighbor's combine or the distant drone of a crop duster. This was deeper, meaner, like the earth itself was growling. I stepped out onto the porch of my century-old farmhouse, still in my flannel pajamas, a mug of black coffee steaming in my hand. My border collie, Rusty, perked up from his spot by the door, ears twitching. That's when I saw them. 12 bulldozers, lined up like an invading army at the edge of my property, their yellow steel glinting in the dawn. In front of them stood a woman I'd come to know as Marjorie Tate, president of the Willow Creek HOA, decked out in a tailored blazer and aviator sunglasses like she was auditioning for a bad action movie. She held a megaphone in one hand and a clipboard in the other, barking orders to a crew of hard-hatted workers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd had one too many cups of coffee and was hallucinating. But the chickens clucking nervously in their coop and the goats bleating at the fence line told me this was real. A sign staked into the dirt read, "Land Acquisition, Willow Creek HOA Development Project." My land. My home. The place my great-grandfather homesteaded in 1892. Now apparently claimed by a suburban HOA that didn't even border my property. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the absurdity sink in. It was 6:45 a.m. on a Wednesday, and I was about to have the worst morning of my life, or so Marjorie thought. I set my mug on the porch railing and pulled on my boots, the kind caked with years of honest dirt. Rusty trotted beside me as I crossed the gravel drive toward the convoy. Marjorie spotted me and lowered her megaphone, her lips curling into a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. She strode forward, heels sinking slightly into the soft earth, and met me halfway. "Mr. Daniel Harper," she said, her voice dripping with authority, "you are in violation of Willow Creek HOA Ordinance 17C, pertaining to unapproved land use in our expanded jurisdiction." She thrust her clipboard at me, revealing a map that looked like it had been cobbled together in a middle school computer lab. Colored lines zigzagged across it, swallowing my 200 acres into what she called the Willow Creek Future Community Zone. I glanced at the map, then back at her. "Marjorie, you're standing on my land, waving a piece of paper that doesn't mean squat. Who gave you the right to park heavy machinery on private property?" Her smile didn't falter. She tapped the clipboard with a manicured nail. "This land is no longer yours, Daniel. The HOA has claimed it for community development, a park, a walking trail, maybe even a boutique coffee shop. You'll be compensated, of course, but you need to vacate by Friday." I laughed, a short, sharp bark that made Rusty tilt his head. "You're joking, right? This is a prank." But the bulldozers revved their engines, and one of the operators leaned out of his cab, looking impatient. Marjorie's eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. "Laugh all you want, but you're not above the law. This is progress, and you're standing in its way." She turned and shouted into her megaphone, "Prepare to clear the boundary line." I felt a prickle of anger but kept my voice steady. "Marjorie, you've got 10 minutes to get these machines off my land, or I'm calling the sheriff." She scoffed, waving a hand. "Go ahead. The sheriff answers to the county, and the county knows we're in the right. Pack your bags, farmer. Your time's up." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Marjorie thought she'd won, thought she'd steamrolled me with her fake maps and rented bulldozers. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. I wasn't just Daniel Harper, the guy who grew corn and fixed fences. I was the man who'd sat on the county planning board for a decade, the one who'd redrawn the zoning lines she was trying to erase. I turned back toward the house, Rusty at my heels, and heard Marjorie yell, "That's right, walk away. You're done here." I ignored her, my mind already racing. Inside, I'd find the binder that held every deed, every survey, every legal protection I'd spent years securing. Marjorie had started a war, but I was about to end it quietly, legally, and with the kind of precision that only comes from knowing exactly where the lines are drawn. As I reached the porch, my neighbor, Old Man Jenkins, leaned over the fence, his weathered face split by a grin. "She don't know, does she?" he called, chewing on a piece of straw. I shook my head. Not yet, Jenkins. Not yet. He chuckled, low and rough. Gonna be a hell of a show. I grabbed my coffee mug and stepped inside, the screen door slamming behind me. Marjorie's megaphone echoed in the distance, but it was just noise now. The real fight was about to begin, and she was already out of her depth. The air inside my farmhouse was cool, a sharp contrast to the heat rising in my chest as I crossed the creaky oak floor to my office. The room was small, cluttered with maps, old ledgers, and a desk that had seen better days. I set my coffee mug down, the ceramic clinking against a stack of surveyor's notes, and opened the steel cabinet in the corner. Inside was the binder, 3 inches thick, its spine cracked from years of use but still holding every piece of paper that mattered. Deeds from 1892, zoning amendments I'd drafted in 2015, and a copy of the County Land Preservation Act I'd fought for tooth and nail. This wasn't just paperwork, it was my family's legacy, etched in ink and sweat. Marjorie Tate thought she could erase it with a clipboard and a bad attitude. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I flipped to the section on property boundaries, my fingers tracing the precise lines drawn by a surveyor my grandfather hired in the 1940s. The map was clear. My 200 acres were untouchable, locked under agricultural reserve status. The HOA's so-called future community zone was a fantasy, and I had the documents to prove it. But as I scanned the pages, a flicker of unease crept in. Marjorie's confidence wasn't just bravado. She'd rented 12 bulldozers, hired a crew, and printed signs, none of that came cheap. Someone was backing her, or she was desperate enough to bet everything on this stunt. Either way, I needed to know more before I made my next move. I grabbed my phone and dialed Sheriff Tom Callahan, a man I'd known since high school. His voice crackled through the line, gruff but steady. Dan, what's this about bulldozers on your land? I gave him the short version. Marjorie, the HOA, the fake map, and her threat to flatten my farm by Friday. Tom let out a low whistle. She's got guts, I'll give her that. Sounds like a hostile trespass with heavy equipment. I'll be there in 20 with a couple deputies. Sit tight. I thanked him and hung up, but sitting tight wasn't my style. I stepped back onto the porch, where Rusty was pacing, his hackles up. Marjorie was still out there, strutting like a general, her megaphone blaring instructions to secure the perimeter. I watched her for a moment, trying to piece together her game. Marjorie wasn't a local. She'd moved to Willow Creek 5 years ago, bought a McMansion in the HOA's gated enclave, and clawed her way to the presidency in record time. I'd met her once, at a county fair where she complained about the smell of my hay bales. She struck me as the type who'd argue with a stop sign and expect it to apologize. But this was next-level delusion. I noticed a new figure beside her now, a man in a cheap suit, clutching a tablet and nodding furiously as she spoke. Probably a lawyer or someone pretending to be. He kept glancing at the bulldozers, then at me, like he was calculating how deep this hole was about to get. My neighbor Jenkins hobbled over again, his straw had tilted back. She's got a whole circus out there, he said, spitting tobacco into the dirt. Heard her talking about a multi-phase development. Said it's gonna have a yoga studio and one of them fancy juice bars. I raised an eyebrow. On my cornfield? Jenkins cackled. Yup. Thinks she's building utopia on your dirt. You gonna let her? I didn't answer, just watched as Marjorie handed her megaphone to the suit guy and started taping yellow caution tape across my front gate. The audacity was almost impressive. I walked toward her again, this time with the binder tucked under my arm. The bulldozers were still idling, their diesel fumes stinging my nose. Marjorie saw me coming and smirked, crossing her arms. Back for round 2, Daniel? Or are you ready to sign over the deed? I ignored the jab and held up the binder. This is the real map, Marjorie. County approved, legally binding. Your little art project doesn't change that. She snorted, snatching the binder from my hands. She flipped through it, her smirk fading as she hit the section on agricultural protections. For a split second, I saw doubt flicker in her eyes, but she shoved the binder back at me. This is outdated. Our ordinance supersedes your dusty old papers. I kept my voice calm, though my grip on the binder tightened. You don't have jurisdiction here. This land's been in my family for 5 generations. You think you can waltz in with a megaphone and rewrite history? She stepped closer, her perfume clashing with the smell of diesel. History's overrated, Daniel. Progress wins. And progress says this land is ours. The suit guy piped up, his voice shaky. Ms. Tate, maybe we should verify the permits before. She cut him off with a glare. We have all the permits we need, Roger. Stay focused. I was about to respond when a new sound cut through the morning, a low, rhythmic thumping from above. A sheriff's helicopter circled overhead, its blades kicking up dust. Marjorie's head snapped up, her sunglasses slipping down her nose. "What the hell is that?" she muttered. I didn't bother hiding my smile. "That's the sound of you overplaying your hand." The chopper landed in a nearby field, and 3 patrol SUVs rolled up, lights flashing. Sheriff Tom stepped out of the lead vehicle, his badge glinting in the sun. He was a big man, with a no-nonsense stare that could make a guilty man confess without a word. "Miss Tate," Tom said, striding toward her, "we've got a report of unlawful trespass and unauthorized use of heavy machinery. Care to explain?" Marjorie's confidence cracked, but she rallied fast. "Sheriff, this is a legal HOA operation. We have full authority to develop this land." She thrust her clipboard at him, but Tom barely glanced at it. "Ma'am, I don't care if you've got a letter from the governor. You're on private property without permission. That's a problem." The suit guy, Roger, started typing furiously on his tablet, probably Googling how to avoid jail time. I stood back, letting Tom handle it, but my mind was already 3 steps ahead. Marjorie wasn't acting alone. The money, the equipment, the sheer scale of this, it smelled like a bigger scheme. Maybe a developer pulling strings, or a political favor gone wrong. I'd need to dig deeper, starting with the county records office. For now, though, I watched as Tom's deputies started photographing the bulldozers and questioning the operators. One of them, a young guy with a nervous twitch, jumped down from his cab and asked, "So, are we still getting paid for this?" Marjorie snapped at him to shut up, but the damage was done. Her crew was unraveling, and she knew it. As the deputies worked, I caught Marjorie staring at me, her jaw tight. She wasn't just angry, she was scared. Scared of losing face, scared of being wrong. I'd seen that look before, in board meetings and bar fights. It was the look of someone who'd bet everything on a bad hand and was just starting to realize it. I met her gaze and said, "You should have checked the maps, Marjorie. Might have saved you a lot of trouble." She didn't respond, just turned and stormed back to her car, Roger scrambling to keep up. The bulldozers sat silent now, their engines off, like giant yellow tombstones marking the end of her first assault. The deputies were still milling around, their radios crackling as they documented the scene. Marjorie's car had peeled out, leaving a cloud of dust and a few confused bulldozer operators scratching their heads. I stood on the porch, the binder heavy in my hands, watching the chaos settle into an uneasy quiet. Rusty lay at my feet, his tail thumping lazily, oblivious to the storm that had just blown through. But I wasn't relaxed. Marjorie's stunt wasn't a one-off. She'd be back, and I needed to be ready. That meant digging into the why and how of her attack, and it started with the stack of papers in my office. I headed back inside, the screen door creaking behind me. The farmhouse smelled of cedar and coffee, a grounding reminder of what I was fighting for. My office was a time capsule, shelves lined with my father's old almanacs, a framed photo of my kids on their first tractor ride, and a map of the county I'd marked up during my years on the planning board. I sat at the desk and opened the binder again, this time with purpose. The agricultural reserve clause was ironclad, but I needed to know if Marjorie had any legal foothold, no matter how flimsy. People don't rent bulldozers on a whim. There was a paper trail somewhere, and I was going to find it. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the county's digital records system, a clunky interface I'd cursed more than once. A quick search for Willow Creek HOA turned up their charter, a few minor zoning requests from years past, and a recent application for a community enhancement project. The application was vague, lots of buzzwords like sustainable growth and resident wellness, but it mentioned a land survey conducted by a firm called Pinnacle Development. That name rang a bell. Pinnacle had tried to push a strip mall through the county 2 years ago, a project I'd shot down for violating wetland protections. If they were involved, this wasn't just Marjorie's ego trip. It was a coordinated land grab. I jotted down the survey's reference number and cross-checked it against the county's master plat. Sure enough, the Pinnacle survey extended the HOA's boundary by 300 acres, swallowing my farm and half of Jenkins' property. The problem? It was never approved. The county's official plat, updated last year, showed no such change. Marjorie's map was a forgery, or at best a deliberate misinterpretation. I printed the official plat and tucked it into the binder, my pulse quickening. This was fraud, plain and simple, and it gave me leverage. But leverage wasn't enough. I needed allies. I called Clara, the county clerk who'd worked the records office since I was in diapers. She picked up on the second ring, her voice warm but sharp. "Danny Harper, what kind of trouble you in now?" I laughed, despite myself. "The kind with bulldozers and a fake map. Can you pull everything filed by Willow Creek HOA in the last 6 months? And anything tied to Pinnacle Development?" Clara clucked her tongue. "Pinnacle, huh? Those snakes are always slithering around. I'll have it for you by noon. You owe me a jar of your wife's peach jam." I promised her 2 jars and hung up, feeling a little lighter. Clara was a bloodhound with a filing cabinet. She'd find something. As I waited for her call, I couldn't shake the image of Marjorie's face when the sheriff arrived. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was rattled. That meant she had something to hide, something bigger than a bad map. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My mind wandered to a conversation I'd had with my dad years ago, when I first joined the planning board. "Land's more than dirt, Danny," he'd said, his voice rough from years in the fields. "It's power, and power makes people stupid." Marjorie was proving him right, but I wondered who else was getting stupid with her. A knock at the door snapped me out of my thoughts. It was Jenkins, holding a thermos of coffee and a grin. "Figured you could use a refill," he said, stepping inside. He'd been a mechanic in the army, fixing tanks in places he never talked about, and now he spent his days tinkering with old Fords and watching the world go by. But he had a knack for knowing things: gossip, deals, secrets. I poured us both a cup and told him about Pinnacle. His eyes narrowed. "Heard they've been cozying up to some folks on the town council. Word is, they're bankrolling Marjorie's campaign for county commissioner next year." I froze, the coffee halfway to my lips. "She's running for my seat?" Jenkins nodded. "Yup. Thinks she can turn Willow Creek into her personal kingdom. Your farm's just the first step." That hit like a punch. This wasn't just about my land. It was personal. Marjorie wasn't just trying to steal my property. She was gunning for my job, my influence, my place in this county. I set the cup down, my jaw tight. "She's got no idea what she started," I said, more to myself than Jenkins. He chuckled, sipping his coffee. "Nope. But I'd pay good money to see her face when she figures it out." I managed to smile, but my mind was racing. Marjorie had escalation in her blood, and I needed to be ready for her next move. I glanced at the binder, then at the phone. Clara would have those files soon, and Tom was probably still grilling Marjorie's crew. The pieces were coming together, but the puzzle was bigger than I'd thought. I wasn't just fighting for my farm anymore. I was fighting for everything I'd built, and I'd be damned if I let Marjorie Tate take it. The sun was climbing higher, baking the fields in a late summer haze, as Sheriff Tom's deputies wrapped up their work. The bulldozers stood silent, their operators now clustered in a shady spot near the fence, sharing cigarettes and muttering about unpaid invoices. I leaned against the porch railing, the binder still under my arm, watching Tom walk toward me. His boots crunched on the gravel, and his face was set in that unreadable way that meant he'd seen something he didn't like. "Dan," he said, tipping his hat back, "this is a mess. But it's a mess we can handle." He held up Marjorie's clipboard, now in an evidence bag. "This map of hers. It's not just wrong, it's fabricated. No county stamp, no surveyor's seal. She's in deep." I nodded, unsurprised but relieved to hear it confirmed. "What about the operators? They know anything?" Tom shrugged. "Most of them are day laborers, hired through a temp agency. Said they got a call yesterday to show up here with the machines. Didn't ask questions, cash job, no paperwork. But one guy mentioned a consultant who gave the orders. Not Marjorie. Someone named Vince." I frowned. "Vince who?" Tom shook his head. "Didn't get a last name. But I'll run it through the system. If he's tied to Pinnacle, we'll find him." The mention of Pinnacle sent a jolt through me. If they were orchestrating this, Marjorie was just the front woman, the loudmouth they'd sent to take the heat. I handed Tom the printout of the county's official plat. "This is the real boundary. Her survey's a lie, and I've got Clara pulling every file tied to the HOA and Pinnacle. You might want to coordinate with her." Tom took the paper, his eyes scanning it. "Good. I'm citing her for trespass and unauthorized equipment use for now. If we can prove fraud, it's a felony. You want to press charges?" I hesitated. "Not yet. Let's see how far she digs herself in." Tom gave me a knowing look. "Playing chess, huh? Just don't let her rook you." As he walked back to his SUV, I noticed a small crowd gathering across the road. Neighbors, mostly, drawn by the flashing lights and the helicopter that was now lifting off. Among them was Ellie, who ran the feed store in town. She waved me over, her ponytail bouncing. Dan, what in God's name is going on? I heard Marjorie's trying to turn your farm into a strip mall. I crossed the road, Rusty trotting behind. Not quite. She's got some harebrained idea about a community park. Brought bulldozers to make her point. Ellie's jaw dropped. On your land. Is she nuts? I shrugged. Nuts or backed by someone with deep pockets. Either way, she picked the wrong fight. Ellie's husband, Mike, joined us, wiping grease from his hands. He was a mechanic who'd worked on my tractor more times than I could count. Heard she's been cozying up to some developer types at the country club, he said. Keeps bragging about big plans for Willow Creek. You think she's got money behind her? I nodded. Pinnacle Development's name keeps coming up. I'm digging into it. Mike whistled. Those guys don't play small. Watch your back, Dan. I thanked them and headed back to the house, the weight of their words settling in. Pinnacle wasn't just a company. They were a machine, and Marjorie was their battering ram. Back inside, I found my wife, Sarah, in the kitchen, slicing tomatoes for lunch. She was a public defender, sharp as a tack and twice as tough, with a calm that could steady a hurricane. She glanced at the binder in my hands and raised an eyebrow. So how bad is it? I set the binder on the counter and filled her in. Marjorie, the bulldozers, Pinnacle, the fake map. Her eyes narrowed as I mentioned the consultant named Vince. Sounds like a proxy, she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Pinnacle's probably using Marjorie to test the waters. If she fails, they cut her loose. If she wins, they swoop in. I nodded, impressed but not surprised. Sarah had a knack for seeing the board when everyone else was focused on the pieces. She poured me a glass of iced tea and leaned against the counter. You need to hit them where it hurts, publicly. Get the zoning board involved, maybe the press. Marjorie's banking on you staying quiet. I took a sip, the cold tea soothing my throat. Already on it. Clara's pulling files, and Tom's got her on trespass. I'm thinking of calling the Gazette, too. Sarah smiled, a glint in her eye. That's my man. But don't underestimate her. She's not smart, but she's desperate. Desperate people do stupid things. I reached for her hand, squeezing it. Let her try? I've got you, the sheriff, and 100 years of paperwork on my side. The phone rang, cutting through the moment. It was Clara, her voice brisk. Dan, you're going to want to see this. Pinnacle filed a preliminary land use proposal 3 months ago, buried in a stack of routine permits. It's got Marjorie's signature as community liaison. And get this, they're claiming eminent domain. My stomach dropped. Eminent domain was a dirty trick, a way to seize private land for public use. But it required county approval, and I'd never seen this proposal cross the planning board. Send me everything, I said, my voice tight. And Clara? Check if anyone on the town council's tied to Pinnacle. She promised to dig deeper and hung up. I turned to Sarah, my mind racing. They're trying to claim eminent domain. That's why Marjorie's so bold. Sarah's face hardened. They can't. Your land's agricultural reserve. Eminent domain doesn't apply unless the county votes to override it. She was right, but the fact that Pinnacle was even trying meant they had someone on the inside. I grabbed my keys. I'm heading to the records office. Need to see those files myself. Sarah nodded, handing me a sandwich wrapped in foil. Eat on the way. And Dan, don't let her get in your head. I kissed her forehead and headed out, the binder under one arm, the sandwich in my hand. Marjorie thought she'd caught me off guard, but she was about to learn that I played the long game. And I always kept my cards close. The drive to the county records office was a blur of green fields and dusty roads, the kind of scenery that usually calmed me. Today, it didn't. My mind was a tangle of questions. Who was Vince? How deep did Pinnacle's influence go? And why was Marjorie so sure she could pull this off? I popped open the foil and took a bite of Sarah's sandwich, the tang of mustard grounding me. The radio played a low hum of country music, but I barely heard it. I was already mentally flipping through the files Clara had promised, imagining the paper trail that would unravel Marjorie's scheme. I pulled into the courthouse parking lot, a squat brick building that hadn't changed since the 70s. Clara was waiting at the front desk, her silver hair pulled into a bun, a thick manila envelope in her hands. Danny, she said, sliding the envelope across the counter, this is a hornet's nest. You sure you want to kick it? I gave her a half smile. Already got stung, Clara. Might as well finish the job. She shook her head, but her eyes sparkled with mischief. That's the Harper I know. Just don't burn the county down. Back in my truck, I tore open the envelope. Inside were Pinnacle's proposal, a stack of emails between Marjorie and someone named Vincent Caldwell, likely our mystery Vince, and a list of campaign contributions to 2 town council members. The proposal was a masterclass in vague ambition. 500 acres of mixed-use development, including retail, housing, and recreational amenities. My farm was labeled Parcel A, marked for a community center. The emails were more revealing. Vince urged Marjorie to secure the land by any means necessary, promising full support from Pinnacle's legal team. One email even mentioned a bonus if she delivered by the end of the quarter. I leaned back, the pieces clicking. Marjorie wasn't just delusional, she was bought. As I drove home, my phone buzzed. It was Jenkins, his voice urgent. Dan, you better get back here. Marjorie's got a new trick. I pressed the gas, my heart pounding. What now? He hesitated. She's got a survey crew on your south field. They're planting stakes, saying it's for a road expansion. I cursed under my breath. The south field was where I grew my best soybeans, and it bordered Jenkins' land. If Marjorie was moving there, she was escalating fast. Keep an eye on M, I said. I'm 10 minutes out. When I pulled up, the scene was surreal. A half-dozen workers in orange vests were hammering stakes into my field. A pickup truck parked nearby with Pinnacle Surveys emblazoned on the side. Marjorie stood by the truck, a new clipboard in hand, shouting directions. Jenkins was there, leaning on his cane, looking like he was 2 seconds from starting a brawl. I parked and strode over, the manila envelope tucked under my arm. Marjorie, I called, my voice cutting through the hum of activity. You didn't learn from this morning, did you? She turned, her smile smug. Daniel, this is a separate project. The county approved a road widening to support our development. These stakes are legal. I held up the envelope. Funny, because I just came from the records office. There's no approved road project here. And this. I pulled out the Pinnacle proposal. This says you're trying to steal my land for a strip mall. Her smile faltered, but she recovered fast. That's a draft. Our final plans are with the council. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You're forging surveys, Marjorie. That's not a plan. It's a crime. Before she could respond, Jenkins piped up, his voice loud enough to turn heads. You know, Dan, this ain't the first time someone tried to mess with your land. He limped forward, his cane tapping the dirt. Back in '82, some hotshot from Chicago wanted to build a factory right where we're standing. Your daddy shut him down with one phone call. Want to know why? I raised an eyebrow, sensing a story. Jenkins grinned. Because your great-uncle was the state surveyor. He drew the lines that kept this land free. And he buried a little gift in the county records, a covenant that blocks any non-agricultural use. You still got that paperwork? I froze, my mind racing back to the binder. I'd seen a covenant, tucked in the back, but I'd never read it closely. If Jenkins was right, it was a silver bullet. I turned to Marjorie, who was glaring at Jenkins like she wanted to strangle him. You're bluffing, she snapped. There's no covenant. I smiled, feeling the tide shift. Guess we'll find out. But for now, get your crew off my land before I call Tom back. She hesitated, then waved at the workers. Pack it up. We'll be back with proper authorization. They scrambled to obey, pulling stakes as Marjorie stormed to her truck. As she drove off, Jenkins clapped me on the shoulder. Your daddy be proud, Dan. But you better find that covenant before she does. I nodded, my jaw tight. The south field was safe for now, but Marjorie was like a dog with a bone. I headed back to the house, the envelope and Jenkins' story weighing on me. The covenant was my next move, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Pinnacle was playing a bigger game, one I wasn't seeing yet. I needed to talk to Sarah, dig into the records, and figure out who Vince Caldwell was. Because if Marjorie was the hammer, he was the hand swinging it, and I wasn't about to let either of them land a hit. The kitchen was quiet when I walked in, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood. Sarah was at the table, her laptop open, a legal pad scribbled with notes. She looked up as I dropped the manila envelope beside her. You've got that look, she said, pushing her glasses up. What's Marjorie done now? I pulled out a chair and recounted the Southfield stunt, Jenkins' story about the covenant, and the Pinnacle emails. Sarah listened, her pen tapping rhythmically, a habit she had when her mind was racing. When I finished, she leaned back, her expression grim. Eminent domain, fake surveys, and now a mystery consultant? Dan, this isn't just about your farm. They're testing the county's spine. I nodded, the weight of it settling in. Jenkins thinks Marjorie's running for my seat. If Pinnacle's bankrolling her, they're not just after land, they're after control. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Then we need to hit them where it hurts, the court of public opinion. Pinnacle hates scrutiny, and Marjorie's too vain to handle bad press. Call the Gazette. Get ahead of her narrative. I hesitated. I'd always kept my fights private, but Sarah was right. Marjorie was already spinning her story. I needed to counter it, fast. I dialed Laura Bennett, a reporter at the Willow Creek Gazette who'd covered my planning board battles before. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright. Dan Harper, what's got you calling on a Wednesday? I gave her the rundown, the bulldozers, the fake map, the Southfield stakes, and Pinnacle's shady proposal. Laura, I said, this isn't just my problem. If they can try this on my land, they can try it on anyone's. She was silent for a moment, then said, I'm coming out there. Bring your documents. And Dan? If this is as big as it sounds, it's not just a story, it's a scandal. By the time Laura arrived, the Southfield was clear, but the stakes holes remained, like scars in the dirt. She was a wiry woman in her 40s, with a notebook that never left her hand and a knack for asking questions that cut to the bone. I walked her through the property, showing her the bulldozer tracks, the fake sign, and the county's official plat. She snapped photos, her camera clicking like a metronome. This is wild, she muttered, zooming in on the sign's fine print. They didn't even spell acquisition right. I handed her the Pinnacle proposal and the emails, watching her eyes widen as she read. Dan, this is fraud. Straight up, lock 'em up fraud. As we talked, a black SUV rolled up, its tinted windows gleaming. Marjorie stepped out, her blazer swapped for a crisp white blouse, her hair pulled into a tight bun. She'd brought Roger, the nervous suit from earlier, and a new face, a slick guy in a tailored jacket who screamed, PR consultant. Laura's camera was already rolling. Miss Tate, she called, striding over, care to comment on allegations of forging land surveys? Marjorie froze, her smile tightening. This is a misunderstanding. The HOA is working to improve Willow Creek for all residents. Mr. Harper is obstructing progress. I stepped forward, holding up the emails. Progress? You're working for Pinnacle Development, trying to seize private land with fake documents. Want to explain that? Marjorie's eyes darted to the PR guy, who whispered something. She straightened, her voice icy. Those are baseless accusations. We have full legal authority, and we'll prove it in court. Laura didn't miss a beat. Court? So you're admitting there's a legal dispute? Marjorie's face reddened, but before she could answer, Roger blurted, We're reviewing all documents internally. The PR guy shot him a look that could have melted steel. Laura turned to me, her microphone out. Dan, your response? I kept it simple. This land's been in my family for over a century. Marjorie's maps are fake, her permits are fake, and her promises are fake. I've got the truth, and I'm not going anywhere. Laura nodded, jotting notes. Marjorie stormed back to her SUV, the PR guy hustling to keep up. As they drove off, Laura grinned. This is going front page. You okay with that? I nodded, though my stomach churned. Going public meant opening my life to scrutiny, but it was the only way to stop Marjorie's spin. That evening, I sat with Sarah on the porch, the crickets humming in the distance. She'd read Laura's draft article, which laid out the fraud allegations in brutal detail. This'll hit like a bomb, she said, squeezing my hand. But Marjorie won't go quietly. She'll double down. I nodded, staring at the south field, where the stake holes were still visible in the moonlight. Let her. The more she talks, the deeper she digs. Sarah leaned against me, her voice soft. You're doing the right thing, Dan. Just don't let it eat you up. I kissed her forehead, but my mind was already on the covenant Jenkins mentioned. If it was real, it could end this fight for good. But finding it meant diving back into the past, and I wasn't sure what else I'd uncover. For now, I'd wait for Laura's article to drop and see how Marjorie squirmed. The war was on, and I was ready for the next round. Laura's article hit the stands the next morning, and by noon, Willow Creek was buzzing. My phone wouldn't stop ringing, neighbors, council members, even a cousin I hadn't seen in years, all wanting to know if Marjorie was really as unhinged as the Gazette made her sound. The headline didn't pull punches. HOA president accused of fraud and land grab scandal. It quoted me, the emails, and an anonymous bulldozer operator who'd called Marjorie a dictator with a clipboard. I was in the barn, checking the tractor's oil, when Sarah burst in, waving a copy of the paper. Dan, you've got to see the comments online. People are losing it. I wiped my hands on a rag and followed her to the kitchen, where her laptop was open to the Gazette's website. The comment section was a war zone, some defending Marjorie as a visionary, others calling for her arrest. One user, Creek Resident 72, claimed she'd raised HOA dues to fund her pet projects. Sarah scrolled through, her lawyer brain in overdrive. This is good, she said. She's losing the narrative. But we need to keep the pressure on. I'm calling Judge Harlan to see if we can fast-track an injunction. I raised an eyebrow. You think it's enough for a court order? She nodded, her eyes fierce. With those emails and the fake survey? Absolutely. We'll freeze her operations before she tries anything else. Sarah wasn't just my wife, she was my secret weapon. As a public defender, she'd spent years outsmarting prosecutors with twice her resources. If anyone could tie Marjorie in legal knots, it was her. I watched her dial the courthouse, her voice calm but commanding, and felt a surge of gratitude. This fight wasn't just mine anymore, it was ours. But as she talked, I couldn't shake a nagging worry. Marjorie's desperation was growing, and desperate people didn't play fair. I needed that covenant, and I needed it now. I headed to the office and pulled the binder again, flipping to the back where the older documents were stored. The covenant was there, yellowed and brittle, dated 1947. It was a single page, written in my great-uncle's meticulous script, declaring the Harper land permanently reserved for agricultural use and barring any commercial or residential development without family consent. It was co-signed by the county clerk at the time and notarized by the state. I stared at it, a slow grin spreading across my face. Jenkins was right. This was a silver bullet. But it needed to be filed officially to hold up in court, and I had no record of that. I called Clara again, who groaned when she heard my voice. Danny, you're going to work me to death. I laughed, apologizing, and asked her to check for the covenant in the state archives. It's from 47, I said. Might be under my great-uncle's name, Samuel Harper. She promised to look, but warned it could take days. Old records are a nightmare, she said. But if it's there, I'll find it. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a mix of hope and frustration. The covenant was my ace, but until I had proof it was legally binding, it was just paper. As I stepped outside, I saw my son, Ethan, pulling into the driveway in his beat-up pickup. He was 22, a grad student studying environmental science, and he'd been home for the summer helping with the farm. He hopped out, his baseball cap backward, and jogged over. Dad, what's this about bulldozers? Mom said some HOA ladies trying to steal our land. I filled him in, watching his face shift from confusion to anger. That's insane, he said, kicking a pebble. Can I help? I've got friends in the AG department who could run soil tests, prove this land's protected. I clapped his shoulder, proud but cautious. Let's hold off on that. Right now, I need you to keep an eye on the south field. If anyone shows up with stakes or machines, call me. Ethan nodded, but I could see the fire in his eyes. He'd grown up on this land, climbing its trees, fishing in its creek. To him, Marjorie wasn't just a threat, she was personal. I sent him to check the fences, then called my daughter, Lily, who was studying journalism at college 2 hours away. She picked up, her voice bubbly. Dad, I saw the Gazette article. You're famous. I chuckled, but my tone turned serious as I explained the situation. Lily, I might need you to dig into Pinnacle Development. See what you can find online, lawsuits, shady deals, anything. She didn't hesitate. On it. I'll call my professor. He's got access to legal databases. We'll bury them. I smiled, amazed at how my kids had become my allies in this fight. By evening, Sarah had news. Judge Harlan had agreed to review our injunction request, but he wanted a hearing in 3 days. We need everything, she said, pacing the kitchen. The covenant, the emails, witness statements. And Dan? Harlan's old school. He'll want to hear from you, not just me. I nodded, my stomach tightening. Public speaking wasn't my thing, but I'd do whatever it took. As we sat down to dinner, Sarah's meatloaf, Ethan's favorite, the mood was tense but united. We were a family under siege, and we weren't backing down. But as I glanced out the window, the south field dark under the stars, I knew Marjorie was out there, plotting her next move. And whatever it was, it wouldn't be subtle. The next morning, I woke to a text from Laura. Check the HOA's website. Marjorie's fighting back. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the Willow Creek HOA page, where a new banner screamed, Save our community, stop the land hoarders. Below it was a letter from Marjorie, accusing me of abusing county authority to block vital development for Willow Creek residents. She claimed I'd falsified records to protect my personal empire and called for a public rally at the courthouse tomorrow. The letter ended with a photo of her standing in front of my gate, arms crossed, looking like a martyr. I tossed the phone onto the bed, my jaw tight. She wasn't just doubling down, she was rewriting reality. Sarah was already up, sipping coffee in the kitchen. I showed her the website, and she shook her head. This is defamation, Dan. We can sue, but it'll take time. For now, we focus on the injunction. I nodded, but the rally worried me. Marjorie was good at rallying a crowd, and if she got enough support, she could pressure the council to override the agricultural reserve. I needed to counter her narrative, and fast. I called Laura, who was already on her way to the courthouse for a follow-up story. Dan, she said, I'm hearing rumors Marjorie's got a new lawyer, a big shot from the city, and they're filing a countersuit against you for obstruction. I cursed under my breath. Let me know what you find. I'm digging into her rally. I drove to the feed store, where Ellie and Mike were holding court with a dozen locals, all buzzing about the Gazette article and Marjorie's letter. Ellie waved me over, her face grim. Dan, half the HOA's eating up Marjorie's sob story. They think you're some greedy landlord blocking their park. I leaned against the counter, frustrated. It's not their land to take. She's lying to them. Mike nodded, tossing a wrench into his toolbox. Problem is, she's loud, and loud wins crowds. You gotta get louder. I didn't want to shout, but I knew he was right. I thanked them and headed home, my mind churning. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Ethan talking to a stranger by the south field, a wiry guy in a polo shirt, holding a camera. I parked and jogged over, my hackles up. Who's this? I asked. Ethan frowned. Says he's a private investigator, hired by the HOA to document land misuse. I caught him taking pictures of the field. The guy looked nervous, his camera dangling. Just doing my job, sir. Ms. Tate said this land's improperly zoned. I stepped closer, my voice low. You're trespassing. Hand over the camera, or I call the sheriff. He hesitated, then bolted for his car. Ethan started after him, but I grabbed his arm. Let him go. We'll deal with it legally. Back inside, I called Tom, who promised to track the PI's license plate. Sounds like Marjorie's building a case, he said. She's desperate, Dan. Watch your step. I hung up, my anger simmering. Marjorie wasn't just fighting dirty. She was spying, lying, and rallying a mob. I sat at the kitchen table, the binder open, and stared at the covenant. Clara still hadn't found the state filing, and without it, the document was vulnerable. Sarah walked in, her phone buzzing. Harlan's moved the hearing to tomorrow, she said. Marjorie's rally's the same day. She's timing it to intimidate us. I nodded, my resolve hardening. Then we'll be ready. Let's call Lily, she might have something on Pinnacle. Lily picked up, her voice excited. Dad, you won't believe this. Pinnacle's been sued 3 times for fraud in other states, fake surveys, bribing officials, the works. And Vincent Caldwell? He's their fixer. Got a rap sheet for extortion in Nevada. I scribbled notes, my pulse racing. Send me everything, Lily. And be careful. These guys play rough. She promised to email the files and hung up. Sarah read over my shoulder, her face pale. Dan, if Pinnacle's this dirty, Marjorie's in over her head. She might not even know how deep. I nodded, but part of me didn't care. Marjorie had chosen her side, and now she'd face the consequences. As evening fell, I stood on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the fields. The rally loomed, and with it, the hearing. Marjorie was coming for me, and she'd brought a new lawyer, a PI, and a mob. But I had Sarah, Ethan, Lily, and a stack of evidence that could bury her. The fight was about to get ugly, and I was ready to meet it head-on. I just hoped the covenant would surface in time to seal the deal. The courthouse was packed the next morning, a sea of faces spilling onto the lawn where Marjorie's rally was in full swing. She stood on a makeshift stage, megaphone in hand, flanked by a banner that read, Progress for Willow Creek. Her new lawyer, a slick city type named Gregory Holt, hovered nearby, adjusting his tie like he was posing for a billboard. The crowd, maybe 100 strong, waved signs calling me a land hoarder and chanted for community rights. I parked my truck and stepped out, Sarah at my side, the binder and Lily's Pinnacle files in a briefcase. Ethan and Lily had driven in, too, their faces set with determination. We were a family, and we were ready. Inside, the courtroom was quieter, but the tension was electric. Judge Harlan, a grizzled man with a reputation for hating nonsense, sat at the bench, his eyes scanning the room. Sarah presented our injunction request, laying out the fake surveys, the trespass, and Pinnacle's fraud history. She was a force, calm, precise, every word a dart. Holt countered, claiming the HOA had implied authority from a 2020 council resolution and accusing me of misusing my position to block development. He waved a stack of affidavits from HOA residents, all claiming my farm was a blight on their community. I gripped the table, my knuckles white, but Sarah's hand on mine kept me steady. Then it was my turn. I stood, my voice steady despite the eyes boring into me. Your Honor, this land's been in my family for 5 generations. It's protected by agricultural reserve status, and I've got the deeds to prove it. Marjorie Tate's maps are fake, her permits are fake, and her lawyer's standing on a lie. I handed Harlan the binder, the emails, and Lily's files. He flipped through them, his face unreadable, but I saw Holt shift uncomfortably. When I mentioned the covenant, Harlan's eyebrow twitched. You got a filed copy of this covenant, Mr. Harper? I swallowed. Not yet, sir. The state's searching for it. He nodded, jotting a note. Find it. Fast. Holt's cross-examination was brutal. He grilled me on my planning board votes, implying I'd rigged the system to protect my land. I held my ground, citing every regulation I'd enforced fairly. The crowd outside grew louder, their chants filtering through the windows, and I knew Marjorie was milking the moment. But then Sarah called a surprise witness, Jenkins. He limped to the stand, his cane tapping, and told the story of the 1947 covenant, adding that Pinnacle had tried to buy his land last year. They offered me $1 million, he said, grinning. I told him to shove it. The courtroom chuckled, and Holt's face reddened. Harlan called a recess, and we stepped outside to face the rally. Marjorie was mid-speech, accusing me of tyranny. Laura was there, her camera rolling, and I seized the chance. Miss Tate, I called, stepping onto the lawn. You want to talk progress? Explain why you forged surveys and hired a PI to spy on my farm. The crowd hushed, and Marjorie's megaphone faltered. Holt whispered frantically, but she ignored him, shouting, You're a liar, Harper. We have proof you're corrupt. I held up Lily's files. Proof? Like Pinnacle's fraud convictions? Or Vincent Caldwell's extortion charges? The crowd murmured, and Laura's camera zoomed in. Marjorie snapped. She lunged forward, knocking Laura's microphone to the ground. The crowd gasped, and 2 deputies stepped in, cuffing her for assault. Holt looked like he wanted to disappear. Sarah pulled me back, whispering, You got her, Dan. Let the judge finish it. Back in court, Harlan returned, his gavel sharp. I've seen enough, he said. The injunction's granted. No activity on the Harper land until this is resolved. And Miss Tate? I'm referring your actions to the DA for fraud investigation. The room erupted, and Holt's shoulders slumped. As we left, the rally was dissolving, Marjorie's supporters drifting away. Ethan hugged me, his grin wide. You crushed it, Dad. Lily was already texting her professor, planning a follow-up article. Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes proud. But I wasn't celebrating yet. The covenant was still missing, and Pinnacle was still out there. Marjorie was down, but she wasn't out, and I knew her next move would be her most desperate. I just didn't know what it would be. The days after the hearing were a whirlwind. Marjorie's arrest for assaulting Laura made every news outlet in the county, and the video of her lunging at the microphone went viral. Social media was ruthless. Memes of her megaphone rants, captioned with HOA Karen strikes again, flooded local forums. But the real fallout was in Willow Creek. The HOA held an emergency meeting, and this time, Marjorie wasn't invited. Sarah and I watched the live stream from our kitchen, Ethan and Lily sprawled on the couch, popcorn in hand like it was a movie. The residents were furious, demanding to know why their dues had funded Bulldozers, a PI, and a city lawyer. One woman stood up, her voice shaking. We trusted Marjorie to make our community better, not to start a war with a farmer. The room roared in agreement, and by the end, the board voted to suspend Marjorie and audit their finances. I should have felt vindicated, but I didn't. The fight had left scars, literal ones in the south field, where the stake holes still dotted the dirt, and figurative ones in the community. Neighbors I'd known for years were split, some siding with Marjorie's progress talk, others rallying behind me. Ellie called from the feed store, her voice low. Dan, folks are talking about a recall election for the council members tied to Pinnacle. You thinking of running again? I sighed, rubbing my temples. Not now, Ellie. I just want my land safe. But the idea lingered. If Pinnacle was buying influence, someone had to stop them. Clara called that afternoon with news. Found your covenant, she said, her voice triumphant. It's filed with the state, notarized in 47, just like Jenkins said. I'm emailing you the certified copy. I pumped my fist, startling Rusty, who'd been napping by the door. Clara, you're a miracle. She laughed. Tell that to my boss. Now go nail those bastards. The email came through minutes later, the covenant's text clear and binding. It was the final piece I needed to lock my land away from Pinnacle forever. I forwarded it to Sarah, who was at her office prepping a motion to make the injunction permanent. This changes everything, she texted back. We've got them. But Marjorie wasn't done. That evening, Jenkins limped over, his face grim. She's back, Dan. Not on your land, on mine. Got a crew digging test wells, saying it's for water rights. I told him to scram, but they've got a permit. I frowned, grabbing my keys. A permit? From who? We drove to his property, where a small drilling rig was parked, 3 workers in Pinnacle vests poking at the soil. A man in a suit, Vincent Caldwell, I bet, stood by a van, talking on his phone. I marched over, Jenkins at my side. This is private land, I said. You've got no right to be here. Vince hung up, his smile oily. Mr. Harper, we're conducting a state-approved water survey. Nothing to do with your farm. I held up my phone, already dialing Tom. We'll see about that. Tom arrived in minutes, his deputies in tow. The permit was real, but it was for a different parcel, miles away. Vince's smile faded as Tom cuffed him for trespassing. The workers packed up, muttering apologies. Jenkins shook his head, watching the van drive off. They're like roaches, Dan. Keep coming back. I nodded, my jaw tight. Pinnacle was testing every angle, my land, Jenkins, even the water under our feet. But the covenant gave me an edge, and I wasn't letting it go. Back home, Sarah was waiting, her laptop open to a new email from Lily. Pinnacle's pulling out, she said, her voice stunned. Lily found a press release. They're reassessing their Willow Creek project due to community concerns. They're cutting Marjorie loose. I sank into a chair, the weight of the fight hitting me. It wasn't over, but it was close. Marjorie had lost her backers, her board, and her mob. All she had left was her pride, and that was a dangerous thing. I looked at Sarah, my voice quiet. She's got one move left, and it's gonna be ugly. Sarah nodded, her hand on mine. Then we'll be ready. The covenant was filed, the injunction was solid, and my family was unbreakable. Let Marjorie try. I was done playing defense. The calm after the hearing didn't last. 2 days later, I was in the barn, stacking hay bales, when Ethan burst in, his face pale. Dad, you gotta see this. Marjorie's on TV. I followed him to the house, where Sarah and Lily were glued to the living room flat screen. Marjorie was at a press conference, her makeup heavy, her voice trembling with rehearsed outrage. She stood behind a podium, a new lawyer at her side, a woman with sharp eyes and a power suit. Daniel Harper has corrupted this county, Marjorie declared, clutching a stack of papers. He's used his position to hoard land, block progress, and intimidate residents. I'm filing a federal lawsuit to expose his crimes and restore justice to Willow Creek. Sarah muted the TV, her face grim. She's suing you, the county, and the planning board. It's a Hail Mary, Dan, but it's messy. Lily, scrolling her phone, piped up. Twitter's going nuts. Half the county thinks she's a hero, half thinks she's unhinged. But she's got a GoFundMe for legal fees, already at 10 grand. I ran a hand through my hair, my stomach churning. A federal suit was a long shot, but it could drag on for years, draining my time and money. Marjorie was betting I'd fold under pressure. She was wrong. I called Laura, who was already at the press conference. Dan, she's got nothing new, just rehashing the obstruction claims. But her lawyer's from a firm that reps Pinnacle in other states. They're not done with you. I thanked her and hung up, turning to Sarah. We need to end this now. The covenant's filed. Can we use it to shut her down? Sarah nodded, already pulling up her legal software. I'll file a motion to dismiss her suit and countersue for defamation. With the covenant and Pinnacle's retreat, her case is dead on arrival. But Marjorie didn't wait for the courts. That afternoon, Jenkins called, his voice shaking. Dan, she's on my land again. Not digging this time, protesting. Got a dozen people with signs, blocking my gate. I grabbed my keys, Sarah and Ethan piling into the truck with me. When we arrived, Marjorie was there, leading a chant. No more Harper tyranny. Her supporters, mostly HOA diehards, held signs accusing me of corruption. Jenkins stood by his mailbox, his shotgun propped against the fence, looking ready to use it. I parked and stepped out, Sarah's hand on my arm. Stay calm, she whispered. She's baiting you. I approached Marjorie, my voice level. You're trespassing again. Leave, or I call Tom. She laughed, waving her signs. This is public property, Daniel. We're exercising free speech. Jenkins snorted. Public my ass. This is my land, lady. Before I could respond, a news van pulled up. Laura's Competition, a local station with a knack for sensationalism. Marjorie seized the moment, shouting, This man's a dictator. He's stealing our future. I held up the covenant, my voice cutting through her rant. This is a legally binding document, Marjorie. Your lawsuit's a sham, and you know it. The crowd hesitated, and the reporter's camera swung to me. Then it happened. Marjorie, in a fit of rage, grabbed the covenant from my hand and tore it in half. The crowd gasped, and Sarah stepped forward, her voice ice. That's destruction of evidence, Miss Tate. You just committed a felony on camera. Marjorie's face went white, her lawyer nowhere in sight. The reporter's microphone was in her face now, asking, Care to comment on that? Marjorie stammered, then bolted for her car, her supporters scattering. Ethan high-fived Lily, who was already tweeting the clip. She's done, Lily said, grinning. Tom arrived minutes later, taking statements and bagging the torn covenant as evidence. Marjorie was arrested, again, this time for destruction of property and disorderly conduct. Her lawyer issued a statement, claiming she was under duress, but no one bought it. The news ran the clip on loop, and by nightfall, her GoFundMe was frozen, her supporters silent. I stood on Jenkins' porch, watching the last protester drive off. Think she's finally out of moves? Jenkins asked, lighting a cigar. I shook my head. Maybe, but I'm not taking chances. Sarah joined us, her arm around me. We've got the law, the truth, and the county behind us. Let her try. I nodded, but my eyes were on the horizon, where the fields stretched unbroken. This was my land, and I'd fight for it until my last breath. The weeks after Marjorie's final meltdown were quieter, but the echoes lingered. Her federal lawsuit was dismissed in a scathing ruling that called her claims frivolous and without merit. The countersuit Sarah filed for defamation settled out of court, with Marjorie paying a modest sum, more symbolic than substantial, but enough to sting. Pinnacle Development vanished from Willow Creek, their website scrubbed of any mention of the project. Vincent Caldwell pleaded guilty to trespassing and left town, his reputation in tatters. The HOA disbanded, replaced by a voluntary neighborhood council with no land-grabbing ambitions. The Bulldozers were auctioned off, the proceeds funding a new playground at the county park. One machine, painted bright blue, became a climbing structure, a reminder of how close we'd come to losing everything. I stood in the south field one morning, the stake holes now filled and planted with clover. Ethan was beside me, checking the soil for his grad project. You ever think about running for council again, Dad? He asked, squinting against the sun. I shrugged, kicking a clod of dirt. Maybe. Someone's got to keep the pinnacles of the world in check. He grinned, and I saw my father in his eyes, stubborn, rooted, unbreakable. Lily was back at college, her article on the scandal published in a regional magazine, earning her a journalism award. Sarah was in her office, drafting a proposal for a county-wide land education program, inspired by our fight. We'd come through the fire together, stronger for it. The community was healing, too. Ellie and Mike hosted a barbecue at the feed store, where neighbors swapped stories of Marjorie's antics, laughter drowning out the pain. Jenkins was there, regaling everyone with his '82 factory tale, his cigar smoke curling into the dusk. Laura showed up, her notebook tucked away for once, and handed me a framed copy of her first article. You're a legend, Dan, she said, grinning. I shook my head, embarrassed. Just a farmer who knows his maps. But as I looked around, at the faces of people who'd stood by me, I felt something deeper than pride, gratitude for the land, the truth, and the fight that had brought us together. A letter arrived that week, no return address. It was from Marjorie, her handwriting uneven. She didn't apologize, but she admitted she'd misjudged the situation, blaming Pinnacle for misleading her. She was leaving Willow Creek, she wrote, to start fresh. I read it twice, then pinned it to the barn wall beside the auction flyer and a new sign. Know your land, know your rights. It wasn't just a trophy, it was a warning. Power without truth was a house of cards, and Marjorie's had collapsed. I walked the farm that evening, rusty at my heels, the fields glowing under a harvest moon. The air smelled of hay and possibility, the kind that only comes after a hard-won battle. I thought of my great-uncle, drawing those covenant lines, and my father, teaching me to read the land like a book. They'd given me more than dirt, they'd given me a legacy. And as I stood there, the wind whispering through the corn, I knew I'd carry it forward, not just for me, but for everyone who called this county home. The lines were drawn, and they'd hold, as long as we remembered where they were.